Good evening, everyone. Is the camera on me? There we go. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Ossip, and I'm Vice President of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. On behalf of the Jewish Board of Deputies, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's event. We are very pleased to have you all with us for this communal briefing with Thomas Mayer and Ashlee Kearney. I will give a formal introduction to our guest speakers in a moment, but we'll officially open tonight's meeting with the Acknowledgement of Country, which will be delivered by Nicole Laupepa, an Indigenous woman from a Gomeroi mob. Raised within a strong Aboriginal cultural family and with a passion for practicing and sharing Aboriginal people's history and educating others about the importance of Aboriginal customs, Nicole's family also has a strong connection to Israel. In 1914 to 1919, Uncle Robert Beale, William Wallace Chatfield, and Archibald Henry Leonard served with honour in the Battle of Beersheva. I will now hand over to Nicole to deliver the Acknowledgement of Country. Is Nicole online? Apologies, everyone. Is Nicole online?
Yes.
Great, Nicole. Delighted to have you. Please go ahead and deliver the Acknowledgement of Country.
Board members, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nicole Laupepa and I am an Aboriginal woman from the tribal lands of Gomeroi, Australia. Gomeroi's vast land stretches through southern New South Wales to the Queensland border, one of Australia's largest Aboriginal tribes, also known as Gomeroi, Gamilaroi, depending on which part of these vast lands you come from. We are traditionally known as peaceful and peacemaking people. I'm honoured to have been invited to join this conversation tonight. It is a conversation held and resonated over for generations in my family. So to share tonight with you is a privilege. With the brief descriptions of my traditional lands and to further establish with you our perception of the Aboriginal and Israeli community, we must never forget the brutality of displacement, discernment, genocide, and racial hatred both people groups and nations have horrifically endured as a continuous basis. But I also must cast my mind to the place of Genesis 21, the place where, after some disagreement, Abimelech agrees that a certain well belongs to Abraham. Of course, this place is Beersheva, otherwise known as the Well of Oath. What a powerful place this is to use the foundations in our conversation regarding Aboriginal Australia and Israel's shared experiences. On the 31st of October 1917, at 4 p.m, the charge of the Australian Light Horse Brigade began their assault on the same Beersheva. The Australian directive was to capture Beersheva and its wells. The Australian assault was successful, with nearly all wells regained intact, enabling water for many squadron horses to gallop and seize Beersheva for the Israeli people. Do you think Abraham's well, the Well of Oath, was one of them? Significantly to me and bearing on this conversation tonight is this. The Australian Light Horsemen who captured the wells, which ultimately led to Jerusalem being handed back to Israel in December on the same year, had the highest number of Australian Aboriginal soldiers than any other Australian Defence Force regiment ever. So for me and my family, and for many others, the Well of Oath, or Abraham's Well, has holistic implications in the formation of relationships, culture, respect and honour between Israel and Aboriginal Australia. our light horsemen seized, defended, and returned to its rightful owners the well of oath. Significantly more important is the actual oath we believe God gave Abraham on your behalf. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of our beautiful land, Australia. And we respectfully acknowledge the biblical appointed owners and custodians of the Holy Land of Israel. May the well of our shared oath of honour, respect and acknowledgement run deep forevermore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We are likewise privileged to have you on the call this evening, and thank you for such an incredibly moving acknowledgement of country. It's particularly appropriate to celebrate strong and proud Indigenous women, given that tonight marks 20 years since the opening ceremony of the Sydney Olympics, when of course another strong, proud Indigenous woman, Cathy Freeman, did us all proud when she famously lit the cauldron. So Nicole, thank you once again for joining us, and we're moved by your sentiment. I will now hand over to Vice President of the Board, Ashlee, who will deliver the Board of Deputies prayer. Is Natalie on the call?
I am.
There we go. Thanks, Nat.
Okay. Thank you so much. ריבונו של עולם, הדרכנו נא בג'וננו, כדי שנוכל ללכת בדרך האמת, תוך תחושה של שיתוף והבנה, נתמיד לדבוק למען קהילתנו ומרות בית ישראל, ברוח של התבוננות ומסירות, ברך את מעשה ידינו, תהיה זו תרומה לביטחון והתקדמות קהילתנו, ולזכות כל בית ישראל בארבע כנפות תבל. Amen. Almighty God, guide us, we pray thee in our deliberations, that we may seek truth and work together in harmony and understanding. May we pursue the interests of our community and the causes of Judaism in a spirit of reflection and dedication. Bless the work of our hands. May it contribute towards the security and progress of our community and towards the welfare of the house of Israel everywhere. Amen.
Thank you so much, Nat. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged tonight to have the opportunity to hear from two speakers from Australia's First Nations community to share directly with our community the key issues and topics that we should know about. Jewish Australians and the Indigenous communities have often fought together in struggles for justice and human rights, from William Cooper and the Australian Aboriginal League's protest against Kristallnacht in 1938 and the Jewish participation in the Freedom Ride in 1965, to the contemporary work that organisations like Shalom Gamarada, Derech Eretz, and the Rona Trampi Trust do today. A number of notable Jews have supported Indigenous Australians in their fight for justice and recognition, a fight that is ongoing to this day, and a fight where we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Indigenous community. We will have time for questions at the end of both addresses, and instructions on how to submit questions will be shared on your screen as our guest speakers speak. Our first speaker tonight is Thomas Mayer. Thomas is a Torres Strait Islander man born on Larrakia country in Darwin. He became a wharf labourer from the age of 17 and then became a union official for the Maritime Union of Australia in his early 30s. Thomas is a signatory to the Uluru Statement from the Hat, and following the Uluru Convention, Thomas was entrusted to carry the sacred canvas of the Uluru Statement from the Hat around the country and build support for a constitutionally enshrined First Nations voice in the Makarrata Commission for truth-telling and agreement-making for treaties. Thomas is also the author of the book Finding the Heart of the Nation on this very important issue. Thomas, we are honoured to have you here on the call tonight, and I'll now pass over to you to hear your remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you for the invitation to the Jewish Board of Deputies. It's an honour to come and join you and be able to talk about the very important Uluru Statement from the Heart. I thank you, Nicole. It's good to see you for that welcome to country, acknowledgement to country. I'm coming to you from Larrakia land here in Darwin in the Northern Territory. And this is where really the journey started for me in regards to the Uluru Statement. It's where I was born and have always lived and worked on the docks here from when I was 17 years old. Really, it's not a lot of time to try and cover everything, but I'll do my best, and I do want to acknowledge there are many familiar names and faces that are participating tonight, some great supporters of this movement and have done a course recently. I want to acknowledge Mark Liebler as well, who was the co-chair who had a great role in ensuring that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had the best opportunity to put together the Uluru Statement. He with Arnie Pat Anderson were co-chairs of the process that led to it, and I'll touch on that soon. First, a bit of context about, and so given there's a lot of people that are familiar on here, I always hate to, or am concerned when I feel like that I'm repeating things to people and boring people. But nevertheless, I'm sure there's some people that would love to hear this story and haven't heard it. So the context behind my involvement was firstly as a wharfie and as an organiser of responses to very poor decisions, very damaging and actually quite fatal decisions that are made about our people. I, as a union official, had the support of the membership to assist leaders in the community here in Darwin to organise protests. Protest against such things as, if you will recall, in 2015, when millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars were cut from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, the services to those communities. And the result was that WA and other states, but WA mainly, announced that they would close a number of communities by cutting off services. So responses to those sorts of decisions, things like the way that youth were being treated in detention in Darwin here, and you know, organising responses to those poor decisions. This organising in the community, the cycle that I noticed of ineffective advocacy, basically, is what really led me to, is one of the main reasons why I support the Uluru Statement. And I'll talk about why. So when we respond to these bad decisions, when people are angry, and we were able to turn out good numbers on the streets, even where sometimes, I mean, we had the best numbers that we'd had in a long time to the protest in 2015 in response to the community closures. We would turn people out, and then it would be a struggle to continue to build on that anger, or us being able to hold these decision makers to account. The government or the powers that be would make partial promises or partial fixes to these problems, and it would always be difficult to see, to advocate effectively. One of the things I noticed in organising our struggle against such decisions was that it was difficult to have coherency about our message on the solutions that we wanted. Specifically, we could have, for example, 5 speakers at a rally, and sometimes 10 different solutions to a problem. What I was realising was that as a movement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for our rights, we lacked structure. We lacked the structure that is required to advocate effectively and to hold these decision makers to account. It was something that I was used to as a unionist. I have always known who our representatives are. We are able to hold those representatives to account through our democratic processes. And in our rules, we have things like monthly meetings. These things are normal for representative structures. I mean, we're in a democracy at the highest level. We're a representative democracy. And so this was a real problem. And when I was invited to a constitutional dialogue in 2016, I was looking for something, a way for us to build our strength, to advocate more effectively. And so it was with great hope that I went to this constitutional dialogue and learnt about the constitutional recognition discourse that had gone on for quite a number of years. And I'll talk about that process because it was a really important process that led to, that culminated at Uluru. Just a little before I became involved in 2015, there was the Kirribilli Statement. And the Kirribilli Statement with the Uluru Statement is just one of many statements and petitions we've had in our past. And I know that a great leader of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from the 30s, someone that is very close to or well respected by the Jewish community, William Cooper, was a part of a petition in the 1930s, a petition to the King that went to the Victorian Parliament and was ignored. That petition called for representation to Parliament. It called for the federal government to take control of Indigenous affairs from the states who were so cruelly treating our people, among other things. There's also the Yirrkala Bark petitions to the Parliament that was ignored. The Yolngu people who put the Yirrkala petition together, Bark petition, took the matter to the Supreme Court in the Northern Territory, and again, it was ignored. We lost that case, though it was somewhat of a precursor to Mabo. The Parliament did establish a committee, parliamentary committee that listened to the petitioners, made recommendations about an interface with the Yolngu people between the Parliament and that community, again, dismissed and ignored. The Larrakia petition to the Queen, the Barunga Statement, and then the Kirribilli Statement and the Uluru Statement all call for voice treaty truth. So the Kirribilli Statement was one that actually called for an opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have a say, to be heard, and to have dialogues in our own communities that would determine our position on constitutional recognition, something that was so pitifully excluded in 1901. Just to talk about the Constitution briefly, in 1901, when the Federation was formed, our people were talked about in those constitutional dialogues as a race that was dying out, a race that would disappear. And that was certainly encouraged by massacres all the way to the late 1920s, and the policies of forced assimilation, and policies that continue to this day that see our people the great injustice. The Kirribilli Statement called for that process, and it also made something really clear. It said that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, when it comes to constitutional recognition, wanted substantive constitutional recognition. So it made a very clear statement that symbolic constitutional recognition, which was talked about up to that date, was not something that our people desired. We wanted empowerment. And the Constitution, being the rule book of the nation somewhat, is where we saw that empowerment being a very, something that, a place that empowerment should be. that exclusion from 1901 had to be addressed. So the Prime Ministers of the time were Tony Abbott, and the Prime Minister was Tony Abbott, and the opposition leader was Bill Shorten, and they agreed to resource this process, and that was where Mark and Auntie Pat Anderson, Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister by then. Far too often in our democracy, Prime Ministers find knives in their back, but the Referendum Council was tasked with going to our people and broader Australia with this question of constitutional recognition. And so that's where I became involved after all of that. Now, the Uluru process was a great process, and I say that as a person that wasn't one of the designers of it, that only came on board when the Darwin Dialogue came about. Professor Megan Davis, a Cobble woman, was the lead designer of this process. She's an expert on public law. She's the first Aboriginal person elected to a United Nations Permanent Forum, and she works on dispute resolution globally between First Nations and nation states. The expertise and the vigour that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders put towards this process really saw this process as something that was unprecedented. Certainly the resources, you know, and the lobbying that Auntie Pat and Mark did to be able to have the means to do this process was important. It was 13 dialogues around the country, covering all parts of the continent and adjacent islands. These 13 dialogues were 3 days each. The expertise of Professor Megan Davis came through with the formula that was applied, so it wasn't an open invitation. The formula sought to ensure a range of perspectives were represented at these dialogues. And importantly, part of the formula was 60% traditional owners to ensure cultural authority at each of these dialogues. The dialogues at the end of 3 days had an accurate record of meetings, so that was read back to the participants and endorsed as amended. And they also elected delegates to go to the culminating convention in the heart of the country at Uluru. So this was the process that led to the Uluru Statement. The task that we had at Uluru was to bring together the synthesis of all that we had determined in the dialogues and try to bring that together in one coherent statement, a position that we could put to the nation. And I say to the nation because throughout the dialogues in Uluru, we learnt a lot about the history of our struggle, about those great leaders like William Cooper, about those statements and petitions. And one of the things that we learnt, certainly as a person that, you know, that was not the leader of the calibre of people like Pat Dodson and Noel Pearson, I learnt that about those statements and petitions that had been put to prime ministers and kings and queens before and had been dismissed so disrespectfully. And so when I say to the nation, the Uluru Statement, the statement that we put together, we did write to the Australian people. The endorsement of the Uluru Statement was an incredible moment. It was a moment after all of those dialogues and 3 days of passionate debate. And I will now recite the Uluru Statement for you, so I hope you can feel what we felt in the room. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That a peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek structural reform, we seek constitutional change to empower our people to take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our own destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. So that's the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I butchered it actually. It was, but it's been a bit of a while between recitations. But it is a very powerful and eloquent statement. There is also the beautiful artwork that it is emblazoned on, and it is the beginning of a people's movement. And I want to acknowledge you all for being great supporters in this movement. To just recap what it calls for a constitutionally enshrined voice, because we need the structure, as I talked about, the experience of our organising on the street, the fact that we have not held the people, the decision makers, the politicians that have done such awful things as the intervention, the cuts to funding to our services, the absolute disgrace that our justice system is, that leads to the mass incarceration, that disproportionate incarceration that the Uluru Statement talks about. We are seeking to establish a political voice that is able to affect the decisions that are made before they are made about us. Also to be able to pursue campaigns, to seek law reform, the many things that we need to do. Soon we'll hear from Ashlee, and I've got great respect for Ashlee. It's an honour to be on a panel with her for the first time. And she'll be talking about deaths in custody. And with the opportunity that the Black Lives Matter movement has given us as an Indigenous people, as Black people in this country, we again, through activism on the streets, have sought to try and shift the decision makers to change so much that needs to be changed. But once again, and I ask you to take note of this, even with that opportunity, we have seen the numbers, the passion diminish over time as we move on to the other things that we care about as peoples. And I want to appeal to you as the Jewish community, as the Board of Deputies, to please lift your vigour on seeking justice for Black people in this country, Black people worldwide, and in particularly on stolen lands here, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There is so much we need to do, and I think the Uluru Statement goes to the root cause of our issues, which is our voicelessness. And so, to conclude, I do hope that the great solidarity that I have experienced as an advocate for the Uluru Statement continues. I hope that you will support this as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, as part of the need to really seek change. What we did at Uluru was give the roadmap, a very specific set of solutions that we want you to walk with us on. That is to constitutionally enshrine a voice and to establish a Makarrata Commission for truth-telling and agreement making. Thank you for your time. I look forward to Q&A because I'm sure I will have missed so much that I wanted to say. I feel a little bit all over the place, a little bit nervous with some of the great people that are on here. And Shana Tova for Friday. A Jewish friend said I should, wish you the best for that celebration. Thank you.
Thomas, Leslie Berger, President of the Board of Deputies. I did in fact hear your entire speech. I apologise. I missed the very start of the Zoom plenum due to my having put my daughter to bed. That's the one negative of having these Zoom plenums. My children are in the background.
Yes, very important.
Thank you so much for your contribution. It's most appreciated. Just one point, the Black Lives Matter movement that comes out of the United States, there is a problematic element to it from the Jewish community's perspective. And I know you don't fit into this category, but there are some of the organisers in America have held anti-Semitic views. And so it's a sensitive issue for the Jewish community, but that does not for one moment take away our very strong support for the Indigenous community in Australia, for the Uluru Statement, which it's actually the policy of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies and the policy of our federal counterpart, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, to support in full the Uluru Statement. So I want to make that extremely clear, and that's why it's so important for us to have this plenum today to give your community an opportunity to better explain to us the issues that you face. So it's now my absolute pleasure to welcome Ashlee Kearney. Ashlee is a proud, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Ngiyampa Wiradjuri and Nagemba woman from far west New South Wales. Ashlee was born and spent most of her life on Darug country in Auburn, New South Wales. Her professional background spans across the education, social and community work sectors. And in the political and policy fields, Ashlee is the Disability Royal Commission Project Manager at the First Peoples Disability Network. Ashlee is extremely passionate in policy and politics and was until recently a policy advisor for both Senator Patrick Dodson and the Honourable Linda Burney MP. Thank you, Ashlee.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you all for having me on tonight. I'd like to acknowledge country. I'm zooming in tonight from Bidjigal country of the Eora Nation, and I would like to thank Nicole for her beautiful acknowledgement and to Natalie for the beautiful prayer. I'd also like to acknowledge the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, yourself, Leslie, the CEO, Vic Aladef, and people that I've been working quite closely with, Linda Ben-Menashe and Mark Rappaport. To all the deputies of the board and everyone that's zooming in tonight, it's a real pleasure to be joining you for this plenum. I'm mindful of time, but just wanted to get some of those points. Leslie, you did touch on something that I did want to explain about the those sensitive comments that have been made from the US Black Lives Matter movement. And so the space that I've been working in is more broadly the systemic changes as to how we can unlock to make those changes for future generations within the criminal justice system. The US movement that I find for Black Lives Matter in Australia seems to be an opportune time that we find if we see the recent deaths that are kind of all over the media platforms. It is a time where we see that momentum building, and a time where we can bring further awareness to what happens in this country. Because if it's out of sight, out of mind, there's, sometimes people don't know if they're speaking to an Aboriginal person. There's different kind of ideas of what an Aboriginal person may look like, what an Aboriginal community is. And so I think it's really important to state that fact that there is no kind of global network of this movement. It's basically using that as a time to open and share what's happening here in this country, from those injustices to then say it's happening also here in this, in our backyard, and for that same outrage to be expressed from the Australian people. Basically, I just wanted to talk about the systemic racism and police brutality that occurs in this country. And I do have strong fears that protests aren't the only solution and aren't enough at times. There needs to be people working on the inside to be, pulling those levers and using those mechanisms. As a policy advisor for, Senator Pat Dodson and Linda Burney, I've seen a lot of what happens within that building, that amazing building in Canberra, and the decisions that get made there. And policy is something that I believe policy is what's taken so much away from my people, and policy is what will get things back for us. And it's important to have policies that are well thought and consulted with those people that are experiencing those injustices. What else do I want to talk? The main issues, I just want to be really quick. The main issues is the criminal justice system discriminates against First Nations people. And that's based on the racism, negativity, and also unaddressed disadvantage. There's mass incarceration, and there is also overrepresentation of First Nations people within the criminal justice system. There is police brutality, excessive force, and excessive policing in Aboriginal communities. This is all stemming since colonisation, since invasion. I believe that the solutions, we can always talk about the issues, but it's always important to highlight those solutions and where to go. There needs to be major reforms to the criminal justice system, and they've been recommended in the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and that was in 1991. My work in disability at the First Peoples Disability Network talks about how important it is to work with people's disabilities. And within the First Nations communities, there is between 45 and 48% of all First Nations people have some form of disability. And in a lot of instances, First Nations people are receiving their first diagnosis or any kind of support when entering the criminal justice system. So if we think about the next point that I think is a major solution, which is justice reinvestment, you'd be thinking about working with people, their vulnerabilities, their communities, those community-led solutions that are imperative to success. And that's, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with justice reinvestment, but that's about early intervention, prevention, diversion programs, working with individuals at so many points in their lives where criminal justice system isn't the answer, where the dollars that would be spent in incarcerating individuals would be better spent or reinvested into those programs that would be investing in, human capital in those people's lives, and really breaking those cycles of inequality and injustice, and also raising the age of criminal responsibility to at least 14. In this country, the Council of Attorney Generals have adjourned their decision to 2021, and the UN Committee of the Rights of the Child is recommending that it is at least 14, and so Australia needs to really pick their game up. I think everyone that's on the call, ways that you can support First Nations people and engage in those ongoing and meaningful relationships. I mean, there's been so many fantastic partnerships with the Jewish and First Nation communities. In the past, so we can't just let that sit in the past. We need to be kind of keeping that train moving and keep working together. I think in your workplaces, if you wanted to get involved in and celebrating and observing days of significance with First Nations people, things like Reconciliation Week, which is really important for truth telling, Sorry Day, January 26th, supporting a Yarbin festival in the city, NAIDOC Week and things like that. So I want to kind of leave some time for question and answers. But yeah, thank you for having me on this evening, and I look forward to the Q&A panel.
Ashlee and Thomas, thank you so much. I'll hand over to Vic Allardyce, our CEO, in 1 minute. He'll read out a range of questions. One action item I'd like to give you both, because it's something that the Jewish community would really want to do and we want to focus on, is what more we can do to help your community. And so any ideas, and some of the ideas that you enunciated tonight, if you don't mind sending a short email, it's something we can further consider both at a plenum and at our directorship level. So if you're happy to do that, that'd be wonderful. So if I can please hand over to Vic Allardyce.
Thanks, Leslie. I actually only have 2 questions at this stage. More might be coming in momentarily. The first one is to Ashlee. Said you touched on the January 26th date and issue. Could you unpack that a little, please? And what date would you like to see Australia Day, or how would you like to see it designated?
So it is quite a significant date for the First Nations community, and there are people that feel quite upset and insulted that the day the nation celebrates its public holiday of unity on a day that people observe as the day of invasion. I mean, there are a lot of propositions of when this day could be. And yeah, so I don't actually have an answer for that. I focus my work personally on things like, reforming criminal justice system and working with people with disability and those kind of more nitty gritty policy issues. Whereas even during the day of January 26th and during a lot of those protests, I've noticed that a lot of other issues that First Nations people will find that they want to advocate for. So things like stolen generations, there could be land rights, things like, deaths in custody can also be included within those protesting events. And it's a day where people are just really expressing their frustration of inaction. So I hope that answered it.
A question from Jennifer Simons could be to either or both speakers. Could you please speak about your understanding of First Nations identity, and in particular how a voice to Parliament will fairly represent the wide spectrum of Indigenous communities across Australia?
Yeah, thanks. If you don't mind, Ashlee, I'll answer. Just firstly, I just want to go back to the Australia Day question very briefly. I think it is very difficult, extremely difficult and complex to answer a question like that until a national representative body is established, which goes to the second question on how it will represent our identity somewhat. So the thing about, I understand as a trade unionist, but there are many examples of how representative bodies operate. Even the Jewish Board of Deputies is a structure where, representative of the Jewish community is my understanding. It could be an association in for a particular industry representing business, and then for maritime workers, that are wharfies and seafarers, for example. So representative bodies, there are many different ways that the model can be designed and established, but ultimately the important things are that the grassroots or the rank and file or the constituency are able to choose a representative and hold that representative to account through democratic processes and in accordance with the Constitution. And so I think it kind of answers both questions, that, that this representative body firstly should be designed by First Nations people, and so you know, in partnership with the government to determine that, because that is not something that is determined right now. The Uluru Statement says that we need a voice enshrined in the Constitution. It doesn't say how. Quite simply, it's a representative body. But then to the first question, once we do that, once we establish a structure where not only Indigenous people know who their representatives are on political matters or national matters, but also broader Australia and the Parliament know who the representatives are, then we are able to answer that question about what is an appropriate date to celebrate this country and who we are.
Thanks, Thomas. Question from Liam O'Callaghan. To any of the three speakers, what has changed since the Royal Commission into the treatment of inmates at Don Dale?
So a little has changed and not enough, to be straight and broad about it. As Ashlee mentioned, we are still struggling to get the age of criminality changed, that, which was, would have been, I'm sure, I'm not certain, but it would have been one of the recommendations. The facility, one of the recommendations was to no longer detain youth in the old adult prison here in Darwin. That continues, though a new prison or new detention centre is being built. It has been slow change and it has been not enough change. We still, I think, ultimately, the greatest problem is that there is still close to, or sometimes 100% of youth that are in detention in the Northern Territory are Indigenous youth. And it goes to the Uluru Statement, where the Uluru Statement says, points out that this, you know, it is not because we have no love for our children. It's not because we are innately criminal. And if you believe that those things are the case, then that is racism. There must be a structural problem in this nation that causes that, because it's not who we are. There's a structural issue here. And so I think to be able to see Royal Commission recommendations enacted, and so it's not only the Don Dale, you know, the Royal Commission into Youth in Detention, there are also many recommendations in the deaths in custody, in stolen generations that haven't been delivered on or enacted. We need the voice. The voice is the key, the political power, a constitutionally empowered and protected voice. So everything comes back to that.
A question from Lauren Millman. Do you have a view about Australia becoming a republic? What sort of impact would that have, could that have, on the Indigenous struggle for proper voice and proper recognition?
Ashlee, do you want to?
I definitely think we should become a republic. I think that we should be our own independent body and be able to govern ourselves. How that would affect Indigenous issues, I think that, to be honest, there will always be issues and there will always be work happening for those solutions. I don't think that a republic would necessarily be that underlying solution that solves all of this. And yeah, I also just wanted to touch on the Don Dale question, just briefly. So it's really just thinking about Royal Commissions and recommendations. I'm currently working on the Disability Royal Commission, and we're so lucky to have a First Nations woman as a Royal Commission Commissioner, Andrea Mason, and we've seen that that has First Nations people on the agenda a lot stronger and louder. At the end of the day, it's the political will of the government of the day to take those recommendations and to make sure that they're implementing them. I think what our part is as workers, community members, organisations, is to ensure that we're placing those solutions in those recommendations so clearly that the government understands what we want from them, and also speaking to them in a language that isn't just down a more conservative path or a progressive path. It's about, you know, the enhancement and the improvement of people's lives at the end of the day. So.
And Leslie, this is supposed there are three questions here which I'll conflate together and could well be the final question. Essentially, people are asking, what can we as a Jewish community do to assist this issue? Any Friedlander, a Holocaust survivor, how can we assist? Eve Altman is asking, what can we do as well? And Joshua Swift talking about through the prism of education. But together, the commonality from the three questions is, what can the Jewish community do to assist in this issue?
I think I spoke quite a bit. Ashlee, do you want to talk? I'm happy to answer as well.
Yeah.
Though. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So being New South Wales based myself and the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, I think it's essential to continue those partnerships and the work that's been happening. I've attended a Shabbat dinner which was honouring William Cooper at the Great Synagogue. Building relationships and learning about each other is so important. Being in a space where you're not shy to ask the difficult questions about each other's cultures or those hard questions, because it's coming out of a place of love and respect to understand where each other's coming from, and you find a lot of things in common and a lot of things different, things that really challenge what you even thought of, you know, or heard or anything like that. So I think that's the important step, is building those relationships. I've been doing work, as I said, with Linda and Mark, and hopefully be having some webinars happening in the future where they'll be very educational and speaking further with the Jewish community and inviting First Nations people. So I think it's by having these opportunities where we're bringing more of our people together, and then we find out how we can work together. But it's definitely those partnerships.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Thomas, please.
Yeah, no, Ashlee, that was great. These are the things we need to do. I would love it if you could continue to walk with us in the Uluru Statement campaign as well. I know that some of you and some of the members of the Jewish Board of Deputies have done an advocacy course with me recently, and so there is certainly, I think, the knowledge that and the understanding that there is an invitation there. And initiative is very important. There's many things that can be done.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sarah, just to add something really quick. So maybe something that people could do straight away would be Googling some local organisations, if any are nearby, or maybe have some synergies with your own work organisation and see if there's projects you could work on together. Getting in touch with your local Aboriginal Land Council. Also seeing if there's any kind of with your local council. So I'm on one of the advisory committees with my local council, and that's kind of getting those, you know, branching out into the community to educate and yeah, build further relationships. So even speaking with your local council, asking your local member, state or federal members, if there's any Aboriginal people around that you can invite to different events, or it's just about breaking those walls. And I think I've been to the museum, and I think even inviting more First Nations people in there and seeing what an amazing space that is, and them being able to envision what a space could be like for them one day.
And two final ones, and perhaps this question could go to Nicole. A question from Lauren. How could non-Indigenous women support Indigenous women with issues relating to domestic violence? Perhaps Nicole might want to add. Nicole there?
Yeah, sorry. I'm happy for Ashlee and Thomas to answer. They're the Aboriginal leaders today on the board. So Ashlee, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. Okay, sorry, what was that question again?
How could non-Indigenous women assist Indigenous women with issues of domestic violence?
Well, I think, you know, we're meeting each other on a woman level and being understanding where our family life, our home life, it can be affected through domestic violence, and supporting each other. sometimes in those spaces, it's kind of about removing the difference of being a different culture or a different kind of, you know, it's meeting as people in that struggle and being able to work together for a solution and supporting that person in that moment of need. Inviting each other over for support or conversations. Yeah, there's a lot that can be done.
Before I turn it over back to the President, Linda Ben-Bash would just like to say a minute about an exciting project which you're working on.
Thanks, Vic, and thank you, Thomas and Ashlee. It's an absolute pleasure to see you again and hear you again tonight. I just wanted to also give an answer to all those people who said, you know, what can we do? As Ashlee and Thomas know, we're actually in the process of building something that the board's calling the Hand in Hand portal. 10 years after the publication of our book, Hand in Hand, we are putting together a portal of resources for the Jewish community and others, and for the Indigenous community, to look at all of the collaborative work we have done, help people get involved in that work, and offer them resources, activities, and all kinds of experiences to expand this relationship and support you better.
Thank you. Leslie, over to you.
If we can please move to Liam O'Callaghan, Chair of the Social Justice Committee, who'll deliver the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Leslie. And thank you also to our two speakers, Thomas and Ashlee, for such a thought-provoking and indeed sobering discussion on the scourge of injustice that lie within the pages of our national history. As US President Lyndon Johnson said of racial injustice, rarely are we met with the challenge not to our growth or abundance, our welfare or our security, but rather to the values and the purposes and the meaning of our beloved nation. And should we defeat every enemy, should we double our wealth and conquer the stars, and still be unequal to this issue, then we will have failed as a people and as a nation. Tonight is but one step of many that our two peoples have taken together and will continue to take together in the fight against racial prejudices, both private and state-sponsored. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers for their time, and I hope we hear from you all soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Ashlee. Thank you, Thomas. It is your time is most appreciated. That was incredibly informative and very, very important issue. I mean, at the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, our focus to date has been on campaigning for and supporting the Uluru Statement, and also helping to develop leadership skills and capacity within the Indigenous community. But we do very much want to hear from you, any other ideas you might have. So if you can please get back to us, that'd be most appreciated. So thank you so much.